Okay, hi everybody. So a little bit more about depth of field today. I'm going to give you a couple different examples here and do what I can with the video camera to try to do this in real time so that you can actually see me make some changes and adjustments to the camera so you can see the difference or the outcome. So in this situation, I'm going to do a couple of different things with just two objects. Now they're about, I don't know, they're about 3 feet apart from each other. So this data color calibrator is about 3 feet closer to the camera than this lens is. And depth of field is really just simply how much of the picture is in focus, right? Do we want just the one object in focus or the other object in focus, or do we want both of them in sharp focus? So it's really about being able to control how much of the picture we have in focus. And it's simply based upon distance or depth, right? How much is in focus in terms of distance? Closer to the camera, how much is in sharp focus, and further away is in sharp focus. So I'm going to do a couple things here, and let's take a look. Let me get behind the camera and show you what we're doing here. So these two objects, right? Let's start practicing some of the techniques, right? So let's zoom in, right? One of the components of depth of field is millimeter of lens used. Now I'm at f4 and this lens goes to f4, so this is as wide open aperture as I can get. And I'm in manual focus mode so that I can pull this focus and show you. So now you can see that the spider monitor calibrating device, the box there, is in sharp focus. And if you look back to the lens and to the background, you can see that that's quite blurry. So this would be an example of short, or what we would call shallow depth of field, because we have very little of the entire picture in focus. Just a small amount is in sharp focus, okay? Now, we can do selective focusing, so I'm not going to change any camera settings. I'm simply going to do what we call a focus pull, and I'm going to focus in a different location. So rather than focusing on the spider, I'm going to focus on the lens in the background. Now watch as I make that lens really sharp in the background. There we go, that looks pretty sharp. Notice how blurry now the spider lens or monitor calibrator, look how blurry that is. So we're simply using selective focusing here to emphasize which object we want or which object we think is important. Get a sip of coffee in there. So there you see selective focusing being used while keeping the exact same f-stop and the exact same millimeter of lens. Remember the three components for controlling depth of field: f-stop, millimeter of lens, camera to subject distance. So we have kept the f-stop the same, we've kept the millimeter of lens the same, we have now simply just changed the focus. Now, if we wanted to try and get both of those objects in sharp focus, well, we will need to change the f-stop. So I'm going to change my f-stop. Now it's going to get darker here, but I'll fix that in a second. Okay. Now let's change our ISO here. We're not dealing with a lot of light in my little studio here in the basement, okay? Now already you can see that the spider is a little bit sharper, okay? So now let's change our selective focus here, and let's get a new focus target, and let's use my coffee cup here, and we'll focus right on the coffee cup, and we'll kind of split the difference between the two. There, that's pretty good, because we now have focused on the coffee cup, and because we're now at f10, let's go to f11. There we go, it's a little darker. Here we go. We're pretty good there. Now we can see that we've now been able to extend our depth of field. We get a good sharp focus on the coffee cup. That looks pretty good right there. Now, remember this amount of blurriness is all in degrees of blurriness. So while the monitor calibrator, the Spider Express, isn't perfectly sharp, it's a lot sharper than it was when we were focused on the lens in the background and at f4. Now we have focused on the coffee cup, which if you look here is about that whole idea of 1/3, 2/3, right? So we focused here. If I could bring that a little bit closer, it'll be closer to 1/3 in front and 2/3 behind. Okay, so that's the rough idea of how depth of field works. So I'm now picking my focus point on the coffee cup rather than the monitor calibrator or the lens, and I've increased my f-stop from f4, big opening, to now f11, small opening. That increases my depth of field, and I have now changed my focus point. So instead of focusing on either object, I have now focused on the coffee cup, and because the depth of field is now increased, because we have gone from f4 to f11, both objects are pretty good and pretty sharp in focus. Now watch as I zoom out a little bit. I'm going to pick up even more depth of field as we go from, say, 100 millimeters now to 70. Boy, everything is starting to look really sharp now, foreground, middle ground, background. So now we see how millimeter of lens plays into the equation of controlling depth of field. Now we're at 50 millimeters. We started at 105. Now we're at 50. Now if we zoom all the way out to 24, you can see my whole little studio setup here. But pretty much everything will be in focus as we have zoomed out. Remember, all three components control depth of field. F-stop, camera to subject distance, which we really haven't changed, and millimeter of lens, which we have changed. We started off at 105 and now we're all the way at 24, so we've zoomed way out and gotten much wider in our view. By doing that, we have picked up depth of field. Now pretty much everything is in sharp focus here. And we changed our f-stop from f4 to f11. So we picked up depth of field that way. So remember, as you go from big aperture to a small aperture, you get more depth of field. More of the picture will be in focus from front to back. When you go from a small aperture to a big aperture, the converse or the opposite happens, and you get less depth of field. And again, as you zoom in, you lose depth of field. As you zoom out, you gain depth of field. So a little bit about depth of field in my little studio setup here at home. So hopefully this will give you a little bit better understanding as to how to manipulate depth of field. Okay, see you next one. Bye.